Hello, my name's Rob Wilby from the Department of Geography and Environment at Loughborough University. I've been asked to talk about monitoring and data needs to enable the UK to adapt to a 3-degree world. Perhaps I'm showing my age by referring to a report that came out about 20 years ago, in which some familiar indicators of rainfall and temperature change were first presented, some indicators of impacts, such as the occurrence of wildfires, and perhaps some even quirky indicators, for example, showing how climate is impacting the UK's potato crop. More recently, we can turn to some of the indicators identified by the Adaptation Sub Committee, and these are listed here, for example, for the natural environment, people in the built environment, and for infrastructure. And although there's quite a different mix of measures here, one thing is common to them all is that we can quantify how changes in these indicators have evolved through time. So once again, we see the familiar metric of wildfire incidents, but we also see the emergence of some more nuanced indicators, for example, measuring the amount of leakage lost by water companies, or the amount of water consumption per capita in the country, the number of properties being built in the flood zone. All of these are helping us to track how the UK's resilience to climate change is evolving through time and our exposure to a host of climate-related impacts. Now, monitoring our exposure to climate risks is relatively straightforward, provided we've got good records of extreme rainfall and extreme temperatures, for example, or long-term records of sea level rise. But keeping track of how well we're adapting or becoming more resilient to those threats is another matter. And here I refer to a really excellent report produced by ADAS on behalf of the UK Committee on Climate Change. And here we see an example of just one of the metrics being used to measure our national resilience, here being quantified by investment in resilience measures by water companies. So these are measures that build in extra links, extra storage, extra redundancy to cope with water scarcity during drought conditions. Key message of this talk is that there's a lot more that we can do to build our capacity to monitor both evolving climate risks and our responses to them. And in the following slides, I'm going to give you some suggestions of ways in which the UK could build capacity in monitoring and evaluating emergent climate risks. And for starters, I think we still have a huge opportunity to rescue and digitize existing long-term records of meteorological variables that may still be sitting on paper in archives. And this is an extraordinarily valuable exercise because it can help us to reinterpret the past. We can perhaps begin to question some of our deep-held assumptions about how rainfall has changed through time. For example, here we see when we correct for undercatch by snowfall in the early 19th century, long-term trends in rising winter rainfall at the national level begin to fade away. In the closing stages of the last National Climate Change Risk Assessment, a number of us compiled a wish list of sources of information we'd really like to have to be able to track climate risks and our resilience to those risks. And here we see a shopping list outlining some of the indicators and metrics that we would have liked to have had. Many of these might be regarded as aspirational because it would involve a considerable effort to compile from a wide range of data holdings and holders, or would require further thought to actually translate the nature of the risk or the opportunity, the information gap being identified, turning that into something that is physically measurable and could be measured over a long period of time, even over successive climate change risk assessments. That's what we're really trying to aim for. In some cases, we may be able to draw upon massive data archives that already exist but haven't been processed necessarily with climate risk and adaptation in mind. And here, for example, are maps of the surface water temperature monitoring network for England since 2000, showing not only the number of sites but the temperature anomaly here in summer. And this sort of information can be used to identify so-called sentinel locations, places where we expect to see strong climate change signals to emerge earliest, therefore giving us a really great advantage at detecting the early onset of climate change. I think there are many other opportunities like this. We can look to our national data holdings and think about how we might be able to process them in smart ways for this sort of purpose. Alternatively, we might want to design new field experiments and observing campaigns to capture data to address specific questions around adaptation. And here, for example, I refer to Loughborough University's temperature network, which we've been running for nearly 10 years now to assess the thermal benefits on rivers of riparian shade. So here we're trying to quantify the benefit for the river system of planting more trees along the banks, which might sound like a very simple idea, but we need that tangible field evidence to quantify the benefits of a proposed adaptation intervention. And there may be many other examples like this where we can design a field experiment to address and test a specific adaptation option. And none of this information will be of any use unless we can put it into the public domain for use by a whole range of stakeholders. And ideally, we would be publishing our UK climate change indicators on a regular basis, ones that sit behind successive reports. We would be placing our national meteorological data sets and other related information in the public domain and using user-friendly portals like the KNMI Climate Explorer to help people find the data, visualize it, download it and process it. I think the UK has still got a long way to go before we have such a tool that enables us to really explore and share our data in these versatile ways. So let me conclude with a data-related wish list. First of all, I think there's considerable scope for more data rescue initiatives, very much like the ones we saw this summer, where old rainfall records were digitized by the public. I think this is a really fantastic way to engage both the public and to build the national monitoring and data assets at the same time. Secondly, I think we could be placing our indicators again into the public domain. So these are the indicators that sit behind successive reports, such as the National Climate Change Risk Assessment. These could again be disseminated through public-facing portals. I think the Environmental Change Network Data Centre is a nice example of how this can be done. Thirdly, as I indicated, we have huge data assets in this country, and we could be exploring these in clever ways to identify key locations within the country where we expect to see early signs of climate change. So again, we can perhaps rationalize resources by focusing on those locations that have the most promising information. Fourthly, we could be commissioning large-scale research programs to field test adaptation interventions, and this should go alongside evaluating adaptation interventions within modelled worlds as well. So we have hard evidence and records to show how those interventions work in practice. And finally, I think we really still need a single unifying portal to bring together all of the nation's meteorological assets and to put those in a forum and a way in which they can be easily accessed and interrogated by a whole range of stakeholders to support not only the tracking of climate change, but how well we are adapting to those emergent risks and opportunities.